I found my wife cheating with her boss on our dream house during our divorce process. Turns out she's secretly worth $850, $0 more than I knew, and now she's suing me for half of it. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, especially not with someone I trusted so completely. It all started with little signs, things I brushed off at first, like her being overly defensive whenever I asked about where she was or who she was with. But the real shocker came when I finally decided to do some digging, and what I found out hit me like a freight train. Her name was Jessica. We had been married for 5 years, and honestly, I thought we had a good thing going. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to genuinely love me, or at least, that's what I believed. We had bought our dream house about 2 years ago, a big, expensive place that we both poured our savings into. I was proud of what we built. But lately, I'd noticed her acting strange. She'd be late for dinners, her phone was always hidden, and she started wearing new perfume I didn't recognize. She also became more dismissive of me, snapping at small things and brushing me off in ways she never used to. One day, I decided to check her phone when she went to the store, something I normally wouldn't do, but I was just curious. I figured I'd find some harmless texts, maybe a flirtatious message from a coworker or something. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a string of messages between her and her boss, Mark. The messages weren't just friendly, they were intimate, suggestive, and downright inappropriate. They talked about meeting up after work, sneaking around, and even explicit sex talk. I was stunned. I read through the messages a few times, trying to make sense of it. Jessica was lying about her whereabouts all along. She told me she was working late, but the messages showed she was with Mark, doing things I don't even want to think about. It wasn't just a fling either. It looked like they had been seeing each other for months. The worst part, she had been hiding it so well, even from her closest friends. I could see that she'd lied about her feelings, her loyalty, everything I thought I knew about her was a lie. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. How could she do this to me? We had plans, dreams, a future that I thought was secure. And now all I could think about was what I was going to do next. I sat there, staring at her phone, trembling with rage and heartbreak. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed to think things through. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire life was suddenly a lie. I never imagined I'd be in this position, caught between the woman I loved and the cold, harsh reality that she'd been cheating on me with her boss. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying everything I'd uncovered, questioning how I missed the signs, how I could have been so blind. It was like a switch flipped inside me, and I realized I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to confront her, but I also knew this was only the beginning of something much darker. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How much money was involved? And what was I going to do about it? As I sat there trying to gather my thoughts, I couldn't help but think about the financial side of things too. I had always trusted that we shared everything, but now I found out Jessica was hiding a secret worth nearly $1 million, 850, zero more than I'd known. Turns out, she'd been secretly worth a fortune, stashed away in various accounts I had no idea about. That fact alone made this whole situation even more complicated. She was planning to sue me for half of it, claiming she deserved her fair share of our assets. The idea that she'd been lying about her financial worth just made me more furious. I felt like I was in some terrible, twisted game, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I had trusted her, shared everything, and now I was faced with a woman who had been secretly plotting her escape while pretending to be the devoted wife. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew that whatever I did, my life would never be the same. I was hurt, betrayed, and angry, but I also knew I had to be smart. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about justice and about protecting what was mine. I didn't want her to walk away with a dime more than she deserved, especially after what she did. That's when I started planning. I needed to gather evidence, talk to a lawyer, and figure out how deep her deception went. The worst part, I still loved her even after everything I'd seen, but love doesn't fix betrayal. It just makes you more confused and vulnerable. I wasn't sure what was worse, losing her or losing everything I thought we had. Either way, I knew I'd be fighting for what was rightfully mine, and I was going to make damn sure she paid for what she did. The moment I realized just how deep the rabbit hole went, I felt like I was suffocating. Finding out about her affair was one thing, but discovering that Jessica had been hiding a fortune worth nearly $1 million, $850, zero more than I'd ever suspected, hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like I'd been played from the start, not just emotionally but financially too. That night I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. The betrayal was one thing, but the shock of her secret wealth made me feel like I'd been living in a fantasy world. I had to get to the bottom of it. I started digging through our joint accounts, bank statements, and her hidden files. It was a painstaking process, but I was determined. What I found was staggering. Jessica had been quietly building this hidden nest egg over the years, funneling money into offshore accounts, and even setting up a trust without my knowledge. She'd been planning her escape, and I was just a pawn in her game. The amount she'd accumulated was enough to buy multiple houses, luxury cars, and still have plenty left over. I also discovered that she'd been lying about her job, her income, and her expenses. She claimed she was just a regular office manager, but her bank statements told a different story. She was living well beyond her means, traveling, dining at expensive restaurants, and shopping for designer clothes, everything funded by money I didn't even know she had. The shocking part, she was planning to sue me for half of everything, claiming that I was entitled to it because we were married. I couldn't believe she was willing to gamble with our future just to walk away with her secret stash. The next step was obvious. I needed to confront her, but I didn't want to do it blindly. I wanted proof, hard evidence that would stand up in court. I started recording her calls, saving her texts, and gathering everything I could find. I also contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in divorce and asset division. I explained everything, her affair, her secret wealth, her plans to sue me. The lawyer told me that I had a strong case, especially if I could prove her infidelity and her hidden assets. The thought of fighting her in court sent a shiver down my spine, but I knew I had no choice. Meanwhile, Jessica kept up her act of being the perfect wife. She was still acting bitchy and dismissive, throwing tantrums over minor things and accusing me of being paranoid. She insisted she loved me, that I was overreacting, and that her affair was just a mistake. She even denied the money she'd hidden, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but I could see through her lies. I had the evidence and I was ready to use it. I was also starting to realize how manipulative she could be, lying, gaslighting, twisting everything to make herself look innocent. The most infuriating part was how she kept spinning her stories, pretending she was the victim. She'd say, "I was just stressed at work," or "Mark and I are just friends," even though I had the messages. She'd cry, yell, and call me paranoid. But I knew better. I'd caught her in her own web of lies, and now I was planning my next move. I had to be smart, patient, and precise. I couldn't let her see how much I was hurting or how angry I was. The financial discovery made everything more complicated. I realized that I had been living under the illusion that we shared everything equally. But she had been secretly stacking her own fortune, probably planning to leave me high and dry. If she succeeded in her lawsuit, she'd walk away with half of our assets, including the hidden money, and I'd be left with nothing. That thought made my blood boil. I was furious that she'd been so calculating, so dishonest. I had to act fast before she managed to pull off her escape completely. I decided to confront her directly but carefully. I scheduled a meeting, pretending I wanted to talk about the house and our future. When she arrived, her face was cold, her eyes darting around. I laid out all the evidence I'd collected, the texts, the bank statements, the offshore accounts. She tried to deny everything, but I wasn't buying it. I told her I knew about her affair, her secret money, and her plans to sue me. Her reaction: she looked genuinely surprised, then angry, then defensive. She started spinning her usual lies, saying she'd only been stressed, that Mark was just a friend, that I was paranoid. But I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I told her I was done being played. I told her I was going to fight her in court, and I had enough evidence to prove her infidelity and her hidden assets. Her face twisted in rage, and she yelled at me about trust and betrayal. She called me a jealous idiot, said I was just insecure and paranoid. But I knew I had the facts on my side. That day I made it clear I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything she'd secretly amassed. That confrontation set the stage for what was coming next. I knew she'd do everything to fight me, to deny everything, and to try to keep her secrets hidden. But I was ready. I'd already started preparing my case, gathering more proof and planning my next steps. Jessica's lies had gone on long enough. It was time for the truth to come out, and I was determined to see it through, no matter how much it hurt. I could feel the storm brewing, and I knew this was just the beginning of a long, messy battle. After that tense confrontation, everything changed. Jessica's attitude grew even more hostile, and I could tell she was scrambling to cover her tracks. She started acting even more bitchy, snapping at me over small things, throwing tantrums and pretending she was innocent. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I had the evidence, and I was ready to take this further. I knew I had to get a lawyer, and fast. I spent the next few days gathering every shred of proof I could find: screenshots of her texts, bank statements, offshore account details, even recordings of her recent calls. I also started digging into her financial history, trying to confirm exactly how much she'd hidden. Turns out she'd been slowly building a secret fortune, stashing it away in multiple accounts, trusts, and investments I never knew about. Her net worth was way higher than I'd ever imagined. She was secretly worth around $850, $0 more than I thought, which completely changed the game. I met with a lawyer, a no-nonsense guy named Mike. I laid out everything: her affair, her secret wealth, her plans to sue me. He told me I had a very strong case, especially with the evidence I'd collected. We discussed how to approach the divorce, how to protect my assets, and how to prepare for her legal move to claim half of everything. The lawyer warned me she'd probably try to spin it as a marital asset, even though most of her wealth was hidden. That meant I had to be meticulous, prove her infidelity, and show that she was trying to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine. While I was doing all this, Jessica kept up her act of being the victim. She'd cry, plead, and even try to guilt me into working things out. She'd say, "I love you, but I just got overwhelmed," or "Mark was just a fling, it didn't mean anything." But I wasn't falling for her lies anymore. I knew she was just trying to manipulate me, and I saw through her bullshit. She was trying to keep her secrets safe while acting innocent. I also noticed she was doing everything she could to hide her money, transferring funds, closing accounts, and even lying about her whereabouts. One day I found out she was planning to serve me with legal papers. That's when I realized she was serious about her plan to take half of everything. It was like a switch flipped in me. I knew I had to be strategic. I didn't want to just lash out. I needed a plan. I decided to play it smart. I hired a private investigator to follow her, just to see if she was hiding anything or meeting with Mark. Turns out, she was still seeing him more than I thought. They'd meet late at night, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at her office after hours. I got pictures enough to prove her ongoing affair if needed. The hardest part was watching her lie so convincingly. She continued to act like the perfect wife in public, but behind closed doors she was scheming and lying. It hurt to see her so manipulative, so cold. I kept asking myself how someone I loved could betray me like this, not just emotionally but financially too. She'd been secretly building her wealth, planning her escape, and now she was trying to take what she thought was hers. The betrayal cut deep, but I had to keep my focus. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my dignity, my future, and the truth. As the days went on, I realized I couldn't trust her anymore. She was a master at deception, and I needed to be just as clever. I started documenting everything: her lies, her actions, her meetings. I made copies of every bank statement, every email, every message. I wanted to make sure I had a solid case, no matter how much she tried to spin things her way. I also started thinking about how to protect myself financially, setting up accounts, changing passwords, and consulting with the lawyer about how to shield my assets. Meanwhile, Jessica's attitude was getting nastier. She'd lash out at me, accuse me of being paranoid, and call me names. The more I uncovered, the more hostile she became. She tell me I was overreacting, that I was just jealous, that I was ruining everything. But I knew the truth now, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I had seen her true colors, and I was ready for whatever legal battle was coming. My plan was to fight her tooth and nail, to make sure she paid for her lies and betrayal. I decided to confront her again, this time with all the evidence in hand. I sat her down, laid everything out on the table, and told her I knew about her affair, her secret wealth, and her plans to sue me. Her reaction. She looked stunned at first, then furious. She tried to deny everything, but I had her cornered. I told her I was prepared to expose her, to go to court, and to fight for what's mine. Her face twisted with rage and desperation. She yelled, called me all kinds of names, and accused me of being paranoid. But I knew the truth, and I was ready to take it to the next level. This was just the beginning. I was going to make sure she paid for her lies, her betrayal, and her greed. I had enough proof now to fight her in court and stop her from walking away with half of everything, especially her hidden fortune. I knew she'd do everything to keep her secrets safe, but I was prepared for that. I was going to expose her, and I was going to come out of this stronger. The fight for my life, my marriage, and my money had only just begun. After that confrontation, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief because I had finally laid all my cards on the table, and dread because I knew Jessica wouldn't go down without a fight. She was furious, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to spin me. She started playing the victim even more, crying crocodile tears and insisting she was misunderstood, that I was paranoid and jealous. But I wasn't buying her act anymore. I had the proof, and I was prepared to use it. I kept gathering evidence, more screenshots, more bank statements, even recordings of her calls with Mark. I also hired a private investigator who followed her around for a few days. The pictures he brought back confirmed what I suspected. She was still seeing him, meeting him late at night, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at her office. She was lying to my face about everything. That was the tipping point. I knew I had to act fast before she managed to hide or transfer anything else, or worse, destroy the evidence. One of the most shocking discoveries was her bank accounts. I found out she'd been funneling money into offshore accounts, accounts I never knew existed. These accounts held hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she'd been transferring funds there gradually over the past few years. I realized she'd been planning her escape long before I even suspected. The fact that she was secretly worth around $850, $0 more than I thought, changed everything. It meant she was not just cheating on me, but also trying to walk away with a huge chunk of our assets, hidden and protected from my reach. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer again, this time with even more evidence. We discussed the best approach to protect my assets, how to handle her potential lawsuit, and how to prove her infidelity and financial deception in court. The lawyer warned me that she'd probably try to claim that her hidden wealth was part of our marital assets, even though most of it was kept secret. I had to prepare for a legal battle that would be long, messy, and emotionally draining. Meanwhile, Jessica was doing everything she could to turn the tables. She accused me of being controlling, jealous, and paranoid. She insisted that Mark was just a friend, that she loved me, and that her affair was just a mistake she regretted. She even tried to guilt-trip me, saying she was overwhelmed and that I didn't understand her. Her words were manipulative, but I could see through them. I knew she was lying, that she was trying to cover her tracks and distract me from the truth. The day she served me with papers to start the divorce process was a wake-up call. It confirmed she was serious about leaving, about taking her secret wealth and her lover with her. I realized I needed to be more strategic than ever. I started changing my passwords, freezing certain accounts, and consulting with my lawyer about how to protect what was legally mine. I also decided to get a forensic accountant involved, someone who could trace her hidden assets and help me build a solid case. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. I'd loved Jessica, trusted her with everything, and now I saw her for what she truly was, a manipulative, greedy woman who had been playing me from the start. It hurt to think about all those years, all the plans we made, now shattered by her lies. But I knew I had to keep my focus. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice and preserving what I had worked so hard for. Jessica's attitude only got worse. She started becoming more aggressive, yelling at me, throwing insults and accusing me of trying to ruin her life. She called me names, said I was just insecure and jealous, and that I was the reason she cheated. But I knew better. I knew she was the one who lied, who betrayed, who manipulated. I kept my cool, knowing that the more she lost control, the weaker she looked. I had to stay calm and collected if I was going to win this fight. I decided to confront her one last time with everything laid out on the table. I told her I knew about her affair, her hidden wealth, and her plans to take half of everything. I told her I was going to fight her in court and I had enough evidence to prove her lies. Her face twisted in rage, but I also saw the fear behind her eyes. She realized I was serious. I warned her that if she continued down this path, she'd end up with nothing. No money, no control, no future. That day, I made it clear I wouldn't be a victim anymore. From that point on, I threw myself into the legal process. I worked closely with my lawyer, trying to stay one step ahead of her. I also started talking to friends and family, trying to figure out my next move emotionally. I was angry, hurt, but also determined. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine, and I was prepared to do whatever it took. The betrayal had cut deep, but I wasn't going to let her win, not without a fight. The legal battle was brutal from the start. Jessica wasn't about to go quietly. She hired her own attorney, and suddenly I was in the middle of a full-blown courtroom war. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she was just a misunderstood wife pushed to her limits, and that I was controlling and emotionally abusive. I knew that was her way of trying to weaken my case, but I had enough evidence to counter every lie she threw out. The texts, the bank statements, the offshore accounts, everything was on my side. Still, her attorney did a good job of muddying the waters, trying to cast doubt on my claims and emphasizing her supposed suffering. Jessica's main strategy was to claim that her wealth was a marital asset, even the money she'd secretly accumulated. She argued that she deserved half of everything because, in her words, we built everything together. But I had the proof that most of her secret money was kept separate, hidden in offshore accounts and trusts she'd set up without me knowing. I presented this evidence, and the judge seemed convinced that she'd been deceptive. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Jessica was good at lying, and she was determined to keep as much as she could. Meanwhile, Jessica kept up her act of being the perfect, innocent wife in front of her friends and family. She'd cry, act betrayed, and blame me for everything. She said I was paranoid and jealous, that Mark was just a coworker who'd gotten caught up in a moment of weakness. That was her favorite line. It was just a mistake. But I had the messages, the recordings, the bank transfers, and photos to prove otherwise. Every time she tried to spin her story, I had a counter ready. I knew I had to stay calm and factual, or she'd use emotional manipulation to sway the court. The turning point came when the forensic accountant I hired finally completed her report. She traced the hidden assets, revealing just how much Jessica had been hiding. It was eye-opening. Her net worth was well over $1 million, with the majority of that in offshore accounts, trusts, and investments I never knew about. The report also confirmed her ongoing affair with Mark, with detailed records of their meetings, phone calls, and even some explicit exchanges. This was the proof I needed to show that Jessica was not only unfaithful, but also a master manipulator trying to cheat me out of my rightful share. Things escalated quickly after that. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue that I was trying to undermine her reputation, but the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was solid, and I could see the judge starting to lean in my favor. Still, Jessica didn't give up. She brought in her own witnesses, friends she claimed could testify to her good character, but I had recordings of her lying, and her own financial records contradicted her version of events. It was clear she was trying to spin a story, but the truth was catching up to her fast. Throughout it all, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I knew I was fighting for my future, but emotionally I was drained. The betrayal had cut so deep, and now I had to relive all of it in court. I kept thinking about how I'd trusted her, how I'd loved her, and how she'd thrown it all away for greed and lust. I also couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that she'd been secretly planning her escape for years, hiding her wealth and her affair while pretending everything was perfect. Despite everything, I stayed focused. I kept pushing forward, working with my lawyer, gathering more evidence and preparing for the final hearings. I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. I wanted her to pay for her lies, her betrayal, and her greed. I wanted to prove that she'd been manipulating everyone, including me, and that she didn't deserve to walk away with half of what we'd built together. The court was my last chance to set things right, and I was determined to see it through. In the end, I realized that the biggest lesson I learned was how deception can hide behind a beautiful face. Jessica was a master manipulator, and her betrayal wasn't just about cheating. It was about greed, lies, and a complete disregard for the vows we took. I never thought I'd be in a position where I had to fight so hard to reclaim my own life, but here I was. I'd been blindsided, but I was also stronger than I ever thought I could be. No matter what happened in court, I knew I had done everything I could to expose the truth and protect what was mine. That gave me some peace, even as the storm still raged around me. The final hearings were the most intense days of my life. Jessica showed up, her face pale but her eyes filled with fury and determination. She tried to act composed, but I could see her trembling slightly, knowing her entire deception was about to be exposed. The courtroom was packed with lawyers, witnesses, and a few friends who still believed her sob story. I sat there, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve, knowing I had done everything I could to lay the truth bare. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out every piece of evidence: her affair, the hidden accounts, the offshore trusts, the recordings. I told the court about her lies, her manipulations, and her greed. I explained how I had trusted her, how I had loved her, and how she had betrayed everything we built together. I presented the forensic accountant's report, showing her net worth and how she'd been secretly enriching herself all along. I could see her lawyer scrambling to keep her from crumbling under the weight of the truth. Jessica tried to deny everything, but her words sounded hollow and rehearsed. Her tears were fake, and her pleas for mercy only made her look more desperate. The judge listened carefully, asking pointed questions, and finally, after hours of testimonies and evidence presentations, the judge made her ruling. It was clear she believed my story and saw through Jessica's lies. The court awarded me full custody of the house, and the assets I'd proven were legally mine. Jessica was ordered to pay back the money she'd hidden, and her claim for half of the assets was denied because of her deceit and infidelity. She was also ordered to pay my legal fees, which were a small victory in the grand scheme but felt like justice. As she left the courtroom, I saw the anger and frustration in her eyes, but I felt a strange sense of relief. I had fought for my future and I had won. In the days that followed, I started rebuilding my life. The house was finally mine, and I was free from her manipulation. I knew she'd try to fight back in some way, but I was prepared. I had everything documented, and I was determined not to let her take more than she deserved. I also discovered she had been planning to leave the country, possibly to start fresh somewhere else, but I had flagged her offshore accounts and trusts. The authorities were involved, and she was barred from leaving until all debts and legal obligations were settled. Looking back, I realize how much I've grown through this ordeal. I learned that trust can be broken in an instant, but resilience and honesty are what truly matter. Jessica's greed and lies almost destroyed me, but I refused to let her succeed. I learned to trust my instincts, to gather evidence, and to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Most of all, I learned that betrayal cuts deep, but it also reveals your strength. To anyone out there going through something similar, I'd say this: don't ignore the signs, but don't let them consume you either. Protect yourself, gather proof, and stand your ground. The truth will come out, and justice, however long it takes, will prevail. Trust is fragile, but your dignity and your right to an honest life are worth fighting for. I may have lost some illusions along the way, but I gained clarity and a newfound respect for myself. That's the real victory.